Sarah Martinez stepped off the dusty Greyhound bus at the small town of Cedar Falls, her worn duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked pavement as she surveyed her new surroundings. After 20 years of military service, she had chosen this quiet place to start over, hoping to find peace in anonymity. The town looked exactly as she had imagined from the online photos. A single main street lined with aging storefronts, a few pickup trucks parked at odd angles, and people moving at the unhurried pace of small-town life. Sarah pulled her baseball cap lower over her eyes and walked toward the address she had memorized, where a small apartment waited above the local hardware store. As she passed the town diner, 3 men in their 30s lounged against a pickup truck, beer bottles in hand despite the early hour. Their conversation stopped as they noticed her approach. The tallest one, wearing a faded college football jersey, nudged his companions and smirked. "Look what the wind blew in," he called out loud enough for her to hear. "Another city girl thinking she can make it in a real town." Sarah kept walking, her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that some battles were not worth fighting, especially when she was trying to blend in. But the men were not finished. "Hey, sweetheart," the second man called, stepping into her path. He wore work boots and jeans stained with motor oil. "You look a little lost. Maybe you need some local guidance from real men who know how things work around here." The third man, shorter but stockier, laughed and added, "City folks always think they're so much smarter than us country people. But when push comes to shove, they can't handle real work or real challenges." Sarah stopped and looked at them calmly. These men had no idea they were speaking to someone who had spent 2 decades in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, someone who had earned the respect of the most elite warriors in the military. But she simply said, "I'm just passing through. No trouble intended." The tall man in the football jersey stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Passing through?" That's what they all say. Then they start trying to change everything, telling us how we should run our businesses, how we should think, how we should live. His breath smelled of alcohol and tobacco. "Maybe she thinks she's better than us," the oil-stained man added, crossing his arms. "Look at how she carries herself, like she owns the place already. Probably one of those career women who thinks she can do a man's job." Sarah felt a familiar calm settle over her, the same feeling she had experienced before countless missions. Her breathing remained steady, her posture relaxed but ready. She had faced armed insurgents in hostile territory, had led teams through situations where split-second decisions meant life or death. But she chose her battles carefully. "I respect that this is your town," she said quietly. "I'm not here to cause problems for anyone." The short, stocky man laughed harshly. "Respect? You don't know what respect means, lady. Respect is earned through blood, sweat, and proving yourself when things get tough. Respect comes from doing the hard jobs that soft people like you can't handle." Unknown to these men, Sarah had earned her respect in ways they could never imagine. She had completed SEAL training when less than 1% of candidates made it through. She had led rescue missions in Afghanistan, had been decorated for valor under fire, and had commanded teams of the most elite special operations forces in the world. Her small frame had deceived many enemies, just as it was deceiving these men now, but instead of revealing any of this, she simply nodded. "You're right that respect is earned. I hope I'll have the chance to earn yours over time." The tall man laughed mockingly. "Over time? Honey, people like you don't last here. When the first real challenge hits, you'll be on the next bus back to wherever you came from. We've seen it before. City people who think small-town life is some kind of romantic adventure until they realize what real life actually demands." "Real life like what?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about their perspective. The oil-stained man gestured broadly. "Like working 16-hour days in the heat and cold, like dealing with equipment that breaks down when you need it most. Like handling problems that can't be solved by calling some customer service number or filing a complaint. Like facing situations where you either figure it out yourself or you fail. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. She had worked in 120-degree heat wearing full combat gear, had repaired critical equipment under enemy fire, and had solved problems where failure meant not just personal defeat, but the deaths of her team members. But she kept this to herself. "I understand," she said. "I'm hoping to learn from the community here." The stocky man shook his head dismissively. "Learn? Lady, this isn't some college course where you can study your way to understanding. This is about having the guts to do what needs doing when everything goes wrong. It's about proving you can handle responsibility when people's lives and livelihoods are on the line." As if to emphasize his point, the sound of screeching brakes and a loud crash echoed from the direction of the main intersection. The three men immediately turned toward the noise, their casual demeanor replaced by alert concern. "Sounds like trouble at the highway junction," the tall man said, already moving toward his truck. "Probably another city driver who couldn't handle the turn." They piled into the pickup truck, the engine roaring to life. As they drove off, the oil-stained man leaned out the window and called back to Sarah, "Now you'll see what real people do when there's real trouble. You might want to stay here where it's safe." Sarah watched them drive away, then began walking calmly toward the sound of the crash. She had no intention of staying behind while people might be in danger, regardless of what these men thought about her capabilities. As she walked, she mentally assessed what she might find: possible injuries, trapped victims, the need for emergency medical care or technical rescue. Her training had taught her to approach every situation with preparation and clear thinking. While others might rush in with good intentions but poor planning, she had learned to arrive ready for whatever she might encounter. The men who had mocked her were about to get their first glimpse of who she really was, though they would not yet understand the full significance of what they were seeing. The crashed vehicle came into view as Sarah rounded the corner. A large delivery truck had jackknifed trying to avoid a car that had run a red light. The car was badly damaged, trapped beneath the trailer, and smoke was beginning to rise from the engine compartment. The three men from the diner were already there, standing uncertainly near the wreckage and arguing about what to do first. Sarah quickened her pace, her mind automatically shifting into command mode. This was exactly the kind of situation where her training and experience could make the difference between life and death. The men who had questioned her ability to handle real challenges were about to learn what she was truly capable of accomplishing. Sarah arrived at the crash scene and immediately began assessing the situation with the systematic approach that had been drilled into her through years of training. The delivery truck driver was conscious, but shaken, standing beside his vehicle and holding his shoulder. The car trapped underneath was more concerning. She could see movement inside, which meant at least one person was alive, but the vehicle's position and the growing smoke indicated time was running short. The three men from the diner were arguing loudly about their next move. The tall one in the football jersey was on his phone trying to explain the location to emergency services. The oil-stained man was attempting to look under the truck, but kept backing away from the heat and smoke. The stocky one stood with his hands on his hips, shouting instructions that no one was following. "We need to get that car out from under there," the stocky man declared. "But I don't see how we're going to move that truck without heavy equipment." "The fire department will have the right tools," the tall man said, covering his phone. "They said they're coming, but it's going to be at least 15 minutes, maybe 20. 20 minutes, the oil-stained man protested. "Look at that smoke. That car could be on fire by then." Sarah approached the group calmly. "Is anyone trapped inside the vehicle?" The three men turned to look at her with expressions ranging from surprise to irritation. "What are you doing here?" the stocky man asked. "This is dangerous. You should stay back." "I asked if anyone was trapped," Sarah repeated, her voice carrying a tone of quiet authority that made them pause. "Yeah," "There's someone in there," the oil-stained man admitted. "We can see them moving, but we can't get close enough because of the heat and smoke. And even if we could, the car is pinned under the truck." Sarah moved closer to the wreckage, her trained eyes taking in details the others had missed. The truck's position, the angle of the car, the source of the smoke, the structural integrity of both vehicles, she processed it all in seconds, her mind automatically formulating a plan. "The smoke is coming from the car's engine, not a fuel fire," she observed, kneeling to look under the truck. "The car's roof is intact, which means the occupant space hasn't been completely compressed. There's an access point here on the passenger side." "Access point?" the tall man asked skeptically. "Lady, that car is crushed. There's no way to get in there." Sarah was already removing her jacket and laying flat on the ground. "The passenger side door is partially blocked but not completely sealed. If someone small enough can get in there, they could check on the victim and potentially assist them out through the rear window, which appears to have been blown out by the impact." "That's crazy," the stocky man said. "You could get trapped in there yourself if something shifts." "Or if the fuel ignites," the oil-stained man added. "This isn't some kind of video game where you get extra lives. This is real danger." Sarah looked up at them from where she lay beside the wreckage. "I understand the risks. But someone is trapped in there, and waiting 20 minutes for the fire department might be too long. Sometimes you have to act with the tools and people you have available." She began sliding under the truck toward the car, ignoring their protests. This was exactly the kind of confined space rescue she had trained for, though usually with better equipment and backup support. But the principles were the same: assess, plan, execute, adapt. The heat hit her immediately as she got closer to the car. The engine compartment was definitely burning, though not yet with open flames. She could hear someone groaning inside the vehicle, confirming her assessment that time was critical. "Hello," she called through the partially open passenger door. "I'm here to help. Can you hear me?" A weak voice responded. "I can't move my legs. The steering wheel is pushing against my chest. I can't breathe very well." Sarah squeezed through the narrow opening, her compact frame allowing her to navigate the twisted metal that would have blocked larger rescuers. Inside the car, she found a middle-aged woman conscious but clearly in distress. The dashboard had been pushed back by the impact, pinning her legs, and the steering wheel was indeed pressed against her chest. "My name is Sarah," she said calmly, beginning to assess the woman's condition. "What's your name?" "Linda," the woman gasped. "Linda Chen. I was driving to visit my daughter in the next town. Is it bad? I smell smoke." "The smoke is from your engine, not inside the car," Sarah explained, checking Linda's pulse and looking for signs of serious bleeding. "Your legs are pinned, but I don't see any major bleeding." "Can you move your fingers and toes?" Linda wiggled her fingers and reported she could feel her feet, which was encouraging news. Sarah examined the dashboard and steering wheel position, mentally calculating what would be required to free her. From outside the car, she could hear the three men arguing again. "She's been in there too long," the tall man was saying. "What if the whole thing goes up in flames?" "We should pull her out," the oil-stained man insisted. "This was a stupid idea from the start." "How are we supposed to pull her out?" the stocky man demanded. "We can barely see her in there." Sarah called out to them, "I need you to check something for me. Look at the truck's rear axle and tell me if you can see any hydraulic fluid leaking." After a moment, the oil-stained man called back, "Yeah, there's fluid dripping, but not a lot." "Good. That means the truck's hydraulic systems are still intact. Linda, I'm going to try something, but I need you to trust me and follow my instructions exactly." "What are you going to do?" Linda asked, fear evident in her voice. Sarah had noticed something the men outside had missed. The delivery truck was equipped with a hydraulic lift gate, and the control panel was still accessible. If she could operate it correctly, she might be able to lift the rear of the truck just enough to relieve some of the pressure on the car. I'm going to try to lift the truck slightly, Sarah explained. When I do, the pressure on your legs might decrease. If it does, I want you to immediately slide back toward me as much as you can. She squeezed back out of the car and moved to the truck's liftgate controls. The three men watched in amazement as she quickly figured out the system and began operating it. "What the hell are you doing?" the stocky man demanded. "You can't just start operating equipment you don't understand." "If you lift that truck the wrong way, you could make everything worse," the tall man added. Sarah ignored their protests and carefully engaged the hydraulic system. The truck's rear end rose slowly, and they could all hear the groaning of metal as the weight distribution changed. "Now, Linda," Sarah called out, sliding back into the car to assist. The pressure on Linda's legs had decreased just enough to allow movement. Together, they worked to slide her back from the pinned position. It took several minutes of careful maneuvering, but eventually Sarah was able to help Linda squeeze out through the rear window opening. The oil-stained man helped pull Linda clear of the vehicle just as the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The three men stood in stunned silence as Sarah emerged from under the truck, her clothes torn and dirty, but her expression calm. Linda was conscious and talking, her injuries appearing to be primarily bruising and possible fractures rather than life-threatening trauma. "That was," the tall man began, then stopped, clearly struggling to process what he had witnessed. "Incredible," the oil-stained man finished. "I've never seen anything like that. How did you know how to operate that lift system? And how did you know the car structure would hold up while you were in there?" the stocky man added, his earlier dismissive attitude completely gone. Sarah simply said, "Sometimes you learn things that come in handy later." The emergency vehicles were arriving now, fire trucks, ambulances, and police cars. As the professional responders took over the scene, the three men found themselves looking at Sarah with completely different eyes than they had just an hour earlier. But they still had no idea who she really was or that this rescue was relatively simple compared to some of the missions she had accomplished in her military career. They were beginning to understand that their assumptions about her capabilities had been wrong, but the full extent of their misjudgment was yet to be revealed. 3 weeks had passed since the accident, and the story of the mysterious woman who had rescued Linda Chen had spread throughout Cedar Falls. Sarah had managed to slip away from the scene before the reporters arrived, maintaining her desire for anonymity. But the three men from the diner had told everyone who would listen about her remarkable actions. Now, as Sarah sat in that same diner having her morning coffee, she noticed the subtle change in how people looked at her. The dismissive glances had been replaced by curious respect, though most residents still knew nothing about her background. The tall man in the football jersey approached her table, looking uncomfortable. His name was Dave, she had learned, and he worked at the local auto repair shop. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Sarah nodded, and Dave settled into the seat, clearly struggling with what he wanted to say. "I owe you an apology," he began. "The way we talked to you that first day, the assumptions we made, that was wrong of us." "Everyone makes assumptions," Sarah replied quietly. "I've made plenty of my own." "But you didn't treat us badly because of your assumptions," Dave pointed out. "You could have told us off, could have made us look like fools, but you didn't. Even when you saved Linda, you didn't make a big deal about proving us wrong." Before Sarah could respond, the diner door chimed, and 2 men in military dress uniforms entered. They scanned the room until their eyes found Sarah, then approached her table with purposeful strides. "Commander Martinez?" the senior officer asked, his voice carrying the crisp authority of career military. Sarah looked up, her expression remaining neutral. But Dave could see a subtle shift in her posture, a straightening that somehow made her seem both more alert and more commanding. "Yes," she replied simply. "Admiral Richardson sends his regards, Commander. He asked me to deliver this in person." The officer handed her an official envelope with military seals. As Sarah opened the envelope and read the contents, Dave watched in growing amazement. Commander? Military? The woman who had been mocked by him and his friends was apparently someone of significant importance in the armed forces. "Please tell the Admiral I'm honored by the recognition, but I'm no longer active duty," Sarah said, her voice taking on a tone of quiet authority that made Dave realize he was seeing a completely different person than he had thought. "With respect, Commander." "The Admiral said you might say that," the junior officer replied. "He also said to tell you that the Navy doesn't consider your service finished just because you've changed your mailing address." The senior officer continued. "The rescue operation you conducted here has been brought to our attention. The technical proficiency, the risk assessment, the successful execution under pressure, these reflect the highest standards of your training and experience." Dave felt his mouth go dry as the implications hit him. This woman, who he had dismissed as a soft city girl, was being recognized by Navy officers for her rescue skills. But there was clearly more to the story. "If I may ask," Dave interrupted, his voice tentative, "what kind of training are we talking about?" The senior officer looked at Sarah, who gave a small nod of permission. "Commander Martinez is a decorated Navy SEAL with 20 years of active service," the officer explained. "She completed multiple combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, led special operations teams, and received numerous commendations for valor under fire." Dave felt the blood drain from his face. A Navy SEAL. He had lectured a Navy SEAL about handling tough situations and proving herself under pressure. The woman they had mocked as being unable to handle real work was someone who had literally risked her life in combat zones for 2 decades. The senior officer continued. "The commander was particularly known for her expertise in technical rescue operations and emergency leadership. She once led a mission that saved 12 hostages from a compound that was under siege for 18 hours. Sarah looked uncomfortable with the attention. "That's enough, Lieutenant. I appreciate the Admiral's message, but I chose to retire for a reason." "Of course, Commander. We'll report that you're well." The 2 officers departed as efficiently as they had arrived, leaving Dave staring at Sarah in stunned silence. Word spread quickly through the small diner, and soon other customers were looking over with new understanding. The oil-stained man, whose name was Rick, and the stocky one, called Tommy, arrived within minutes, having heard about the military visitors from someone who had seen them enter. They approached Sarah's table with expressions of deep embarrassment mixed with awe. "You're a Navy SEAL," Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We told a Navy SEAL that she didn't know what real work looked like." "Former SEAL," Sarah corrected gently. "And you weren't wrong about real work being important. It's just that we all define real work differently based on our experiences." Rick shook his head in disbelief. "But you let us talk to you like that. You didn't say anything to put us in our place." "Why would I?" Sarah asked. "You were protecting something you valued, your community, your way of life. I respect that, even if your approach was a bit rough around the edges." Dave leaned forward. "But you could have shut us down immediately. One word about your background and we would have backed off." Sarah smiled for the first time since they had known her, and they could see both strength and kindness in her expression. "That wouldn't have solved anything. It would have just made you resentful or made you treat me differently for the wrong reasons. I'd rather earn respect through actions than demand it through credentials." Tommy looked ashamed. "We judged you based on how you looked, where we thought you came from, assumptions about what you could or couldn't do." "Everyone makes snap judgments," Sarah replied. "The important thing is being willing to change those judgments when you learn new information." Rick sat down heavily in one of the chairs. 20 years in special operations. How many missions? How many times did you put your life on the line?" "Enough," Sarah answered simply. "But that's behind me now. I came here because I wanted to be part of a community." not because I wanted to be set apart from it. Dave struggled to process this revelation. But why here? Why Cedar Falls? Someone with your background could live anywhere, do anything. This is exactly why I chose here, Sarah explained. I spent 20 years in a world where your value was determined by your rank, your mission success rate, your security clearance. I wanted to go somewhere where I could just be a neighbor, where I could contribute to a community without the weight of all that history. Tommy shook his head. But we almost ran you out of town before you even got started. No, you tested me, Sarah corrected. In your own way, you were seeing if I had the character to be part of your community. The fact that you're here now, willing to acknowledge that your first impressions were wrong, tells me this is exactly the kind of place I was looking for. The three men sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of how wrong their initial assessment had been. Finally, Rick spoke up. Is there anything we can do to make up for how we treated you? Sarah considered the question. Actually, yes. Linda Chen mentioned that her car was totaled and she's having trouble getting to work while she recovers. She lives alone and doesn't have family nearby. We could organize rides for her, Dave offered immediately. Make sure she gets to her doctor appointments, grocery shopping, whatever she needs. And maybe check on her house while she's recovering, Tommy added. Make sure everything's secure, help with any repairs or maintenance she can't handle. Sarah nodded approvingly. That sounds like exactly the kind of thing a strong community would do. As the three men left the diner to begin organizing help for Linda, Sarah reflected on the ironic turn of events. She had come to Cedar Falls hoping to escape recognition and live quietly, but instead had found something more valuable. Acceptance based not on her military achievements, but on her willingness to help others when help was needed. The men who had initially mocked her capabilities had learned that true strength often comes in forms that aren't immediately visible, and that the most impressive people are often those who don't feel the need to advertise their accomplishments. For Sarah, their transformation from skeptical critics to respectful neighbors confirmed that she had chosen the right place to begin the next chapter of her life. The small town that had seemed ready to reject her had instead welcomed her, not as a decorated war hero, but as someone who proved through actions that she belonged among them. It was exactly the kind of recognition she had been hoping to find,